The chandeliers of the Hensley Grand Ballroom glowed like frozen constellations, their crystals scattering light over gowns of silk and tuxedos tailored with precision. Champagne flutes chimed in manicured hands. A string quartet whispered from the corner. This was the wedding of the year, a ceremony where wealth dressed itself as perfection. But perfection had its shadows. Near the marble stage, Clara Hensley, ruthless in diamonds and satin, rose from her gilded chair. Her voice sliced through the music like ice-breaking. "Maria," she called. From the service aisle, a young maid froze. Maria Torres, her uniform plain against the sea of elegance, carried the weight of 8 months of pregnancy in her trembling body. Her eyes darted toward the exit, but there was no escape. Clara's lips curved in satisfaction. "Come here, girl," Clara commanded. "Sing for us. Sing the piece I gave you." Gasps and muffled laughter rippled across the ballroom. Everyone knew Maria as the maid, not the entertainer. But Clara's cruelty was dressed as amusement. Even Jonathan Hensley, the groom, shifted uneasily at her side, too polished to intervene, too weak to stop her. Maria's hands clutched her apron. She had once dreamt of stages of music of freedom. Tonight, the stage was a trap. She climbed onto it, one hand pressed to her swollen belly, the other gripping the microphone like a lifeline. A sheet of music was placed before her, a piece impossibly difficult, designed for failure. The room quieted. Silence was more suffocating than noise. Mariah opened her mouth, but only a trembling note escaped, fragile as glass. A chuckle rose from the crowd. Her knees buckled. The world tilted. And then a low, steady sound rippled through the silence. Not mockery, not pity. Strings of a guitar, warm and rough-edged, poured into the air like a hand reaching out in the dark. At the far end of the hall, a man stood, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair falling in waves. His jacket was old, the kind soldiers carried long after battle, its green fabric worn but dignified. He held a battered guitar against his chest, as if it were the last honest thing he owned. Caleb Cross. Few noticed him before tonight, just a handyman fixing a leaky pipe, a face too ordinary for the rich to remember. But now, as his calloused fingers coaxed chords from tired strings, every head turned. Maria's eyes locked on his. Something steadied in her. He gave a single nod, not of command, but of solidarity. Her breath returned. She found her voice. The first verse trembled, but his guitar caught her, carried her. The second verse rose fuller, richer. By the chorus, her voice soared, filling the cavernous ballroom with a sound that was not defeat, but defiance. Guests leaned forward, mesmerized. The cruel smirks faded into awe. Some dabbed their eyes. The ballroom built for excess was transformed into a cathedral of healing. Clara's smile faltered. She had wanted humiliation. Instead, she witnessed transcendence. Maria closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, yet her song rang pure. Caleb wove his music around her like armor. For a moment, Maid and veteran stood not as outcasts, but as artists commanding the very air. And then, just as the final note lingered, Maria's face contorted. Pain struck sharp and sudden. The microphone slipped from her grasp. The hall gasped as she collapsed to her knees, one hand clutching her belly. Before anyone else could move, Caleb was there. He laid the guitar aside and scooped her into his arms, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The chandeliers shimmered above the crowd, parted in stunned silence, and the music of defiance faded into a heartbeat of destiny. The night of shame had become the night of revelation. Dear reader, if this opening gripped you, if your heart raced when Caleb struck those first chords, or if Maria's voice stirred something within you, don't let go now. This story has only begun. Stay with us, share your thoughts, and let's walk together through each twist, each tear and each triumph that follows. The Hensley estate loomed like a fortress of wealth, its sprawling corridors lined with oil paintings of solemn ancestors, each one gazing down, as though to remind every visitor who truly held power. To the staff, it was less a home than a stage, each chandelier polished, each marble floor scrubbed, each servant expected to vanish into silence the moment their duties were complete. Maria Torres had grown used to the silence. It was the cloak she wore while carrying trays of crystal folding linens or scrubbing staircases that spiraled endlessly upward. But silence could not muffle the throb in her back or the weight of her unborn child pressing forward with each passing day. The others whispered about her when they thought she wasn't listening. "She won't last the month," a maid muttered one morning. "Clara will throw her out before." Then another replied. Maria ignored them. Survival left no room for rumors. She tied her apron tighter and balanced a tray of glasses as she walked into the great dining hall. Clara was at the far end, framed by velvet curtains, instructing florists with the sharpness of a conductor directing soldiers. Her gown was emerald, her diamonds catching every flicker of light. Her words, however, were colder than stone. "No roses," she snapped. "Roses are sentimental. I want lilies, pure, unyielding, flawless. Like this wedding will be." Maria's stomach clenched. She lowered her gaze, careful not to meet Clara's eyes. A single misstep, a glass dropped a gesture too slow, and Clara's wrath would lash like a whip. As Maria turned toward the kitchen, a different figure caught her attention. A man crouched by the far wall tool spread beside him, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tanned by labor. His hair brushed his shoulders in dark waves, and though he looked focused on tightening a pipe valve, there was a stillness in him, a gravity that felt out of place in the mansion's chaos. Maria recognized him vaguely. The handyman who fixed the broken boiler last winter. His name, what was it? Caleb. Yes, Caleb. Cross. He barely looked up as she passed, but when a glass rattled on her tray, threatening to topple his hand, shot out with instinctive precision, steadying it before it fell. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. "Careful," he said quietly. His voice low-edged with something she couldn't place concern, perhaps, or the tone of someone used to watching over others. Maria murmured thanks and hurried on, heat flushing her cheeks. She wasn't used to kindness here. Not anymore. Later that evening, when the house had settled into shadows, Maria found herself in the kitchen. Alone, she hummed, while peeling potatoes, the tune slipping past her lips before she realized it. It was a lullaby her grandmother once sang, a melody woven with longing and hope. Her voice, though soft, was rich, carrying the ache of someone who had lost, much yet still dreamed. She didn't notice Caleb at first. He had entered quietly carrying his toolbox, intending to check the leaky faucet. But the moment he heard her humming, he froze. His gaze softened. His hands lingered on the guitar case he had tucked into the box, out of habit, almost as if fate itself had planted it there. Without thinking, he drew it out. The first chord was faint, almost tentative. Maria spun around, startled, a paring knife still in her hand. Caleb stood near the doorway, strumming gently, his expression unreadable, but his music steady sure. Her eyes widened. "You play," he gave a small shrug. "Used to." His fingers brushed the strings, again shaping the lullaby into something larger. Fuller, a harmony that lifted her simple humming into something luminous. For a moment the kitchen was transformed. The flickering light above seemed to soften. The scent of herbs and simmering broth mixed with the warmth of notes that hung in the air like prayer. Maria felt her throat tighten. She sang without meaning to the words rising clearer, stronger. Their voices and strings met like long-lost companions. When the last chord faded, silence filled the kitchen again. Maria's cheeks glistened. She quickly turned back to the potatoes, ashamed of her tears. "You should keep singing," Caleb said softly. She shook her head. "I can't. Not here." He wanted to argue, but something in her voice warned him. So he only nodded, tucked the guitar back into its case, and left without another word. Yet as Maria listened to his footsteps fade, something in her chest stirred a memory of who she had been before life narrowed her world to aprons and silence. Elsewhere that night in a small apartment across town, Caleb returned to his daughter. Daddy Lily squealed as she ran into his arms. 8 years old, with eyes bright as the morning sky, she clung to him fiercely. "You're late again. Did the rich people break another sink?" He chuckled, kissing the top of her head. "Something like that." Lily wrinkled her nose. "You smell like fancy soap." Then her tone softened. "But you look sad." Caleb hesitated. He thought of the maid, her trembling hands, her voice so unexpectedly beautiful. "I heard someone sing tonight," he admitted. "She reminded me of the music I used to play." Lily tilted her head. "Then why don't you help her?" "Heroes don't hide." Her words pierced deeper than she knew. Caleb hugged her tighter, his heart torn between the safety of shadows and the pull of a destiny he had long abandoned. In the mansion, Maria lay awake, one hand on her belly, the lullaby still echoing. She whispered to her unborn child, "Maybe someday we'll sing without fear." And so, in the silence of 2 different homes, 2 souls carried the same melody, unaware that soon it would bind their fates forever. The small apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. It was a modest place tucked above a laundromat where machines hummed into the night. For Caleb Cross, it was more than shelter, it was sanctuary. He closed the door behind him and set down his worn guitar case by the sofa. Lily was already busy arranging her dolls into a concert, each one seated neatly in a row of plastic chairs she had scavenged from thrift stores. She waved at him with a conductor's flourish. "You're just in time for the show, Daddy," she announced. Caleb smiled, exhaustion softening into warmth. "What's on the program tonight?" "Everything," she replied dramatically. "But first, snacks." She pulled a bag of popcorn from the counter, the butter smell filling the air. He watched her chatter, her eyes alight, and thought not for the first time that she was the reason he had survived the darker years. When she finally settled, Lily picked up her toy microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared to the dolls, introducing my dad. Caleb shook his head, chuckling. "I don't perform anymore." "You still can," she insisted, her voice dropping to a soft plea. "Play, Daddy. Just one song." He hesitated, as he always did. The guitar was more than wood and strings. It was memory. Some of those memories were golden, lit by the applause of small-town bars and county fairs. Others were jagged, stained by the silence after he lost his wife, by the nights he drowned in loneliness after returning from war. But Lily's eyes, they mirrored the woman he had loved, gentle yet insistent. He picked up the guitar and tuned it carefully, the familiar ritual steadying his breath. The first strum filled the room, a mellow sound that resonated off the walls. Lily clapped in delight. "That's it. See, you haven't lost it." Caleb smiled, but inside he felt the old ache. "I never lost it. I buried it." As the final note faded, Lily leaned against him. "You know that maid from the mansion?" she asked suddenly. His hand stilled. "What do you mean I saw her once?" Lily continued. "She gave me a cookie when I was waiting in the hall while you fixed the boiler. She sings when she thinks nobody's listening." "Did you hear her too?" Caleb's chest tightened. He remembered the sound of Maria's voice in the kitchen, the way it carried longing and resilience. "I did," he admitted softly. Lily grinned. "Then you should help her." "Heroes don't hide," Remember. The words echoed. Heroes don't hide. It was something his late wife had once told him back when he still wore a uniform. Back when courage meant running toward fire, not away from it. He set the guitar down carefully. Sometimes helping isn't so simple, he murmured. But your daddy, Lily, whispered, pressing her cheek to his arm. You always find a way. He kissed her forehead, his heart heavy. Lily's faith in him was unshakable, even when his own had crumbled. The next morning, Maria carried laundry baskets down the long servant hallway of the Hensley mansion. Her back ached, but she kept her pace steady. Passing the grand parlor, she paused. Through the half-open door, Clara's laughter rang out, brittle and triumphant. The guests will never forget it, Clara was saying to a cluster of women. A maid, waddling on stage, trying to sing a piece written for the great sopranos. It will be delightful, like watching a child play dress-up. The women tittered, their jeweled hands covering cruel smiles. Maria froze the basket, digging into her hip. The words pierced her deeper than any insult before. Clara wasn't content with private disdain. She wanted spectacle humiliation crafted into entertainment. Maria moved on quickly, her throat tight. In the laundry room, she sat heavily, folding napkins with trembling hands. For a fleeting moment, she thought of the stranger in the kitchen, the handyman with the quiet eyes, who had joined her song. His music had made her believe, however briefly, that she wasn't invisible. But the echo of Clara's voice returned. A maid waddling on stage. Maria pressed her hands over her belly. We'll survive this, she whispered to her child. Somehow, we'll survive. That night, Caleb found himself pacing. He told himself it was none of his business. He was a repairman, a father, nothing more. Yet Maria's song haunted him, and Lily's words replayed like a refrain, heroes don't hide. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph, himself in uniform, his wife at his side, Lily just a baby in her arms. His wife's smile was wide, fearless. She had always believed in his music and his courage. Caleb set the photo down and reached for his guitar. The strings were cool beneath his fingers, but the chords came easily, as if waiting. He played the same lullaby Maria had sung in the kitchen, and as the melody filled the room, he realized it wasn't just her voice that needed saving. It was his own. For the first time in years, Caleb let himself imagine standing on a stage again, not alone, but with someone whose voice could rise against cruelty. He pictured Maria, her fear turned to strength, her song transforming shame into something radiant. And in that vision, he saw himself stepping out of the shadows. In the mansion, Maria knelt by her small bedside, whispering a prayer into the darkness. In the apartment across town, Caleb strummed his guitar, the notes weaving into her unspoken plea. Neither knew it yet, but their echoes were already finding each other. The Hensley mansion was in a frenzy. With only a handful of days left before the wedding, decorators rushed in and out with boxes of white lilies and silk ribbons. Florists quarreled over arrangements, and caterers adjusted menus under the glare of the bride-to-be. At the center of it all stood Clara Hensley, her posture regal, her eyes sharp as glass. Every order she gave was crisp and absolute. The lilies must be taller. These tablecloths, too plain, replace them with satin. And tell the pastry chef that the cake tiers must gleam, not droop. We are not peasants. The staff scurried like frightened birds. Maria, balancing a tray of polished silver, kept her head down. Her belly was heavier now, her steps slower, but she endured silently. For her work was survival. Yet Clara noticed everything. As Maria set the silver on the dining table, Clara's eyes flicked to her like daggers. "Careful with those hands, girl," Clara said. "We can't have greasy fingerprints on perfection." Maria murmured an apology and turned away, her cheeks burning. Clara smirked, satisfied with the small wound she had inflicted. Later that afternoon, in the sunlit parlor, Clara entertained a group of her wealthy friends. Their laughter chimed like crystal bells as they sipped champagne. Maria passed by with a dust cloth, trying to vanish into the background. One of the women, Margaret Hensley Jonathan's mother, sat quietly among them. Unlike the others, Margaret's gaze was warm, lined with the wisdom of years. She watched Maria for a moment, then turned to Clara. "Clara," she said gently, "did you know the maid has a remarkable voice? I heard her singing softly in the garden. Once. It reminded me of my youth, when music filled our home." The other women chuckled dismissively, but Clara froze. A dangerous light flared in her eyes. A maid with a voice, Clara said, her tone dripping with disdain. How quaint. Margaret frowned. "Don't mock her. Talent deserves respect, no matter the station." But Clara was already scheming. In her mind, Margaret's remark was not a compliment to Maria, but a threat to Clara's carefully crafted image of superiority. When the guests departed, Clara cornered Victor Hale, the head chef, who was stacking crates of wine in the cellar. Victor was a stout man, with graying hair and steady hands, known for his fairness among the staff. Victor, Clara said, her smile deceptively sweet. "We'll have a surprise at the wedding. Our little maid will sing for the guests." Victor straightened, narrowing his eyes. "Maria. She's no performer, and she's with child. She can barely keep up with her duties." Clara's smile sharpened. "All the better. Imagine the spectacle, a maid in her shabby uniform voice cracking under pressure. The guests will laugh, and I'll remind them of their fortune not to be born in rags." Victor's jaw tightened. "That's cruel." "Cruel," Clara's voice cooled to steel. "This is theater, Victor, and I am the star. Do as you're told." She swept away before he could respond, her heels clicking like hammers against stone. Victor stood there for a long moment, the echo of her command heavy in the cellar. His conscience twisted. He thought of Maria, quiet and gentle, her hands swollen from work, her belly carrying life. To exploit her suffering for entertainment, it was wrong. Without fully knowing why, Victor pulled a small recorder from his apron pocket. He had used it before to dictate recipes. Now he pressed the red button and whispered, "Clara Hensley," planning to humiliate Maria Torres at the wedding. The device clicked softly as it captured his words. He didn't know if it would ever be useful, but instinct told him to keep a record. That evening, Maria sat in the servants' quarters, sewing a tear in her apron. Her fingers moved slowly, clumsy with fatigue. The sound of distant laughter drifted down the hall, Clara's voice sharp and triumphant. Maria sighed and closed her eyes. Once she had believed her singing could open doors. Now those doors seemed bolted shut, replaced with endless corridors of servitude. Yet somewhere in the mansion, Caleb's guitar had left an echo in her memory. His steady chords had carried her song even for a moment. She remembered the look in his eyes, not pity, but recognition. Maria touched her belly and whispered, "We'll endure this. One day we'll be free." Unbeknownst to her, freedom was closer than she imagined. For every cruel plan, Clara wove threads of truth and resistance were forming quietly in the shadows, threads that would soon unravel her grand design. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Caleb tucked Lily into bed. She hugged her teddy bear tightly and asked, "Did you see her today?" The maid with the beautiful voice. Caleb hesitated. "Yes." "Will you help her?" Lily's eyes were wide, searching. Caleb brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I don't know yet. But you should," Lily whispered, drowsily. "Sometimes angels need soldiers." Her words lingered long after she drifted to sleep. Caleb sat in the dim light, staring at his guitar. The past he had buried was calling again. And somewhere, in a mansion of marble and cruelty, a woman's voice waited to be defended. The mansion was quieter after dusk. By then, Clara had retired to her suite, with her endless lists of wedding demands, and most of the staff had retreated to their quarters. Only the soft glow of wall sconces lit the hallways, casting long shadows that stretched like secrets along the floor. Maria lingered in the kitchen long after the last pot had been scrubbed. The others had gone, leaving only the scent of roasted herbs and bread clinging to the air. She sat by the back door, her swollen ankles throbbing, her apron folded neatly beside her. In her hands, she held a scrap of paper, a song she had been working on quietly for months. The words were simple, born of long nights and whispered prayers, a song of hope, of holding on when the world turned cruel. She sang it softly now, her voice low so as not to wake anyone. The melody filled the dim kitchen, warm and fragile. It was a lullaby, but also a promise. To her unborn child, to herself. "You will not break," she whispered between verses. "We will not break." Her voice grew stronger, resonant in the stillness. She forgot the mansion, forgot Clara, forgot her fear. She was simply Maria, just a woman with a voice that could carry pain and turn it into something almost holy. And then she heard it. A chord. Low, rich, unmistakable. Her eyes flew open. Across the room in the corner, half lost to shadow, stood Caleb Cross. His guitar rested easily in his arms, his fingers coaxing out chords that slipped seamlessly beneath her melody. Maria froze, her cheeks flushing. What are you doing here?" Caleb's expression was unreadable in the half-light. "Fixing a pipe. Thought I was alone. Then I heard you. I didn't mean," she stammered. "Don't stop," he said simply. His tone wasn't a command. It was quiet encouragement, almost reverent. Maria looked at him hesitant, yet something in his gaze steadied her. She turned back to her song, let the next verse rise. Caleb followed her instinctively, his chords deepening the rhythm, his playing wrapping around her voice like shelter. For a few minutes, the world outside ceased to exist. Two souls, one burdened by war, one burdened by cruelty, found themselves bound by melody. When the final note faded, silence returned. Maria's eyes shimmered. She quickly lowered her head, embarrassed by the tears threatening to spill. "You shouldn't have heard that," she whispered. Caleb set the guitar gently against the counter. "You have a gift. Don't hide it." She shook her head. In this house, a voice is just another way to be mocked. Caleb's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to tell her he had seen men rise from nothing with less. But he recognized the walls she carried, the kind built from years of surviving humiliation. So he said nothing more. He turned toward the door, but paused. "Your song. It matters," he said, finally. Then he left, his footsteps fading into the night. Maria sat still, her heart pounding. No one had told her that before. Not in years. In his small apartment, Caleb lay awake on the worn couch, staring at the ceiling. The melody replayed in his head, her voice echoing like a call he could not ignore. Lily stirred in the next room, murmuring in her sleep. He rose quietly, walked to the window, and strummed the same chords on his guitar. It wasn't just Maria's song. It had become his too. But with the memory came something darker. He saw the stage lights of another life the night he played, before shipping out the cheers of friends who never came back. He remembered his wife's hands on his shoulders, urging him to keep playing even after the war. And he remembered the silence after losing her, when the music became too heavy to bear. Now, Maria's voice had torn open a door he had locked years ago, and part of him was afraid to step through it. The next morning, Clara's voice snapped like a whip across the halls. "Maria!" she barked. "Where is that useless girl?" Maria rushed in, clutching her apron. "Yes, ma'am." Clara held a sheet of music in one jeweled hand. "You will sing this at the wedding. I've decided it will amuse our guests." Maria's breath caught. I can't." "You will." Clara interrupted coldly. "And you will not embarrass me." Maria's knees weakened, but she nodded, unable to protest. Clara smirked, satisfied. Nearby, unseen in the hallway's shadow, Victor Hale clenched his fists. He had overheard. He had also noticed the flicker of fear in Maria's eyes and the cruel delight in Clara's. Quietly, he slipped a hand into his pocket and clicked on his recorder once more. That evening, Maria found herself humming again, almost against her will. She stood by the window of her small servant room, clutching her song. Out in the distance across the city's rooftops, she imagined she could hear a faint guitar answering her. And somewhere, Caleb strummed into the night, unaware that each note was weaving their lives closer together, closer to the moment when neither could remain in the shadows any longer. The morning of the wedding dawned with a sky the color of polished steel. The Hensley mansion bustled like a hive of trucks, unloading crates of champagne florists, rushing through the hallways, waiters rehearsing their steps. From every corner echoed the clatter of preparation for a celebration that promised to be both opulent and mercilessly precise. Maria Torres stood in the staff quarters, tugging nervously at the sleeves of her plain uniform. Her stomach, heavy with child, felt tighter than usual. She had prayed all night for the strength to endure this day unseen. If she could just keep to the kitchens, scrub pots, and refill glasses until it was over, perhaps she would escape Clara's cruel attention. But Clara had other plans. Upstairs, Clara admired herself in a gilded mirror. Her gown, pure white silk embroidered with seed pearls, clung to her like armor. Her reflection smiled back, but it was not a smile of joy. It was conquest. Jonathan, pacing nearby in his crisp tuxedo, glanced at her uneasily. "Clara," he said, "isn't it enough to enjoy the day as it is? Must you involve the staff in your amusements?" Clara turned her eyes glinting. "What is a wedding without a spectacle? They'll adore it. They'll talk about it for years." Jonathan hesitated, but his protest died beneath the weight of her icy stare. He adjusted his cufflinks, silent as Clara's plan solidified like cement. By afternoon, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and laughter. Guests in evening gowns and tailored suits filled the space, sipping champagne, trading investments, and scandals with equal relish. A string quartet played near the stage, their bows gliding across instruments, worth more than most lives in the room. Maria hovered in the back, carrying a tray of drinks. She kept her eyes low, praying she would remain invisible. But then, Clara's voice, sharp as crystal breaking, sliced through the music. "Maria," the tray trembled in Maria's hands. The entire ballroom turned as Clara beckoned her forward, a sheet of music in her hand. "Join us," Clara said sweetly, though her smile was poison. "Our maid has a hidden talent. She will sing for us." A ripple of laughter coursed through the crowd. Some guests leaned closer, intrigued by the promise of humiliation disguised as entertainment. Maria froze. "Please, ma'am." "I can't." Clara's eyes hardened. "You can. And you will." The sheet of music was thrust into her hands. Maria's eyes blurred at the intricate notes, impossibly high, cruelly complex, chosen not for beauty, but for failure. The crowd hushed, waiting. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably at Clara's side, but remained silent. Maria's heart pounded. The stage felt like a scaffold. She glanced toward the exits, but her feet would not move. The microphone loomed before her, cold and merciless. She tried to swallow, but her throat was dry. She closed her eyes, desperate for courage. Her voice faltered on the first note, trembling fragile. A chuckle rose from somewhere in the audience. Clara's lips curved in triumph. And then a whisper. Not in the room, but in her memory. The sound of a guitar steady and strong. The handyman's eyes meeting hers in the kitchen. His words, "Don't hide it. You have a gift." Maria's breath shook. She opened her eyes, scanning the crowd. And there at the far end of the ballroom she saw him. Caleb Cross. He was seated with Lily by his side, the girl clutching a small teddy bear. Caleb's gaze was locked on Maria, steady, unflinching. His jaw clenched, as if he were fighting himself. Lily leaned close to her father, her voice soft but urgent. "Heroes don't hide." The word struck Caleb like a call to arms. For years he had hidden behind odd jobs, behind silence, behind the grief that had chained him. But now, seeing Maria trembling under the weight of Clara's cruelty, he felt the soldier in him stir again. Slowly he stood. The crowd shifted, murmuring as he made his way forward. From a battered case at his side, he pulled out his old guitar. Its wood was scarred, its strings worn, but in his hands, it gleamed with purpose. Maria's eyes widened. Relief, disbelief, and something deeper shimmered in her gaze. Caleb climbed the steps to the stage, his boots heavy against the polished wood. He set the chair beside her, nodded once, and began to play. The first chord rang out, warm and steady, filling the vast room with unexpected gravity. The cruel laughter faltered. The quartet lowered their bows. Maria looked at him, her breath catching. He gave her no command, only a quiet strength that said, "You are not alone." Her voice rose again, this time steadier. Caleb's chords wrapped around her notes, lifting them, carrying them. The second verse grew stronger, her trembling replaced by power. By the chorus, she was no longer a maid at a wedding. She was a singer, a mother, a woman whose voice could not be caged. The ballroom transformed. Guests leaned forward, their expressions softening. Some blinked away tears. Even Jonathan stared, captivated. Clara's smirk shattered, replaced with disbelief. Maria sang, and Caleb played until the air itself seemed to pulse with defiance. The trap had become a triumph. Back at the edge of the stage, Clara's nails dug into her palm. Her perfect wedding was slipping from her grasp, and there was nothing she could do to stop the rising tide of awe in the room. But she vowed silently that this humiliation wasn't the end. For Maria Torres and Caleb Cross, however, it was only the beginning. The first notes lingered in the air like threads of light, fragile yet unbreakable. Caleb's fingers moved across the guitar strings with practiced steadiness, weaving a harmony that seemed to cradle Maria's trembling voice. She began softly, almost hesitant, but each chord gave her courage. Each measure became a bridge over the fear that had shackled her for so long. By the time the second verse arrived, her voice had transformed. What began as a whisper of survival turned into a river of strength, flowing clear and unwavering through the cavernous ballroom. The chandeliers above glittered, as though they too were listening. The audience, once expectant of a spectacle of failure, now sat rapt. No one laughed. No one whispered. Eyes brimmed with tears as Maria's song climbed, buoyed by Caleb's accompaniment. It wasn't the performance Clara had envisioned. It was not humiliation. It was healing. Clara shifted uneasily at the head table, her manicured fingers clutching her champagne glass so tightly the stem threatened to snap. She shot a glance toward Jonathan, expecting a sneer of agreement. Instead, she found his gaze fixed on the stage, wide with awe. Maria closed her eyes, her hand pressed instinctively to her belly as the melody rose higher, her voice shimmering with both pain and hope. Caleb leaned into his guitar. His head bowed, every strum resonating with the weight of his own past, the battles fought overseas, the nights spent in silence, the music he had abandoned. Now, at last, it flowed freely, as though he had been waiting for this moment, for this voice to meet his. When they reached the chorus, something extraordinary happened. Their sounds fused into one, a duet not rehearsed, not planned, but born of necessity and faith. Maria's notes soared. Caleb's chords grounded them. Together, they created a sound so powerful it seemed to wash over the room like a tide sweeping away ridicule and leaving only reverence. Guests rose to their feet, some with hands clasped to their mouths, others openly crying. The cynicism that had filled the hall dissolved, replaced by something few had expected to find at a wedding, a reminder of resilience, of love of the human spirit's refusal to break. Victor Hale, standing at the back with a tray of empty glasses, watched with moist eyes. He had seen Clara's cruelty firsthand. Now he witnessed her plan unravel in the most spectacular fashion, transformed into beauty by the very woman she intended to destroy. Quietly, he slipped his hand into his pocket, reassured by the recorder he carried. The truth was safe. The proof was safe. As the final refrain neared Maria's voice, swelled with all the power she had hidden for years. Caleb followed her, the strings resonating like an echo of his own heart. Together they reached the climax, a soaring note that seemed to pierce the heavens. And then silence. The last chord faded into eternity. Maria lowered the microphone, her chest heaving, her eyes damp but proud. Caleb let his hand fall from the strings, his gaze steady on hers. For a long moment, it was as though the rest of the world had vanished. Then came the sound of applause. Not polite clapping, not the shallow appreciation of society guests, but thunderous, heartfelt ovation. The crowd erupted, standing, cheering, some shouting encore, and others wiping away tears. Jonathan rose to his feet, clapping harder than anyone, his voice breaking as he cried out, "Beautiful." For the first time in years, sincerity filled his expression. Clara sat frozen. The applause did not belong to her. The admiration did not belong to her gown, her diamonds, her carefully curated spectacle. It belonged to the maid she had despised and the veteran she had dismissed. Rage curled in her gut, though she forced her lips into a brittle smile. On stage, Maria's knees weakened. Relief and exhaustion mingled until her body swayed. Caleb reached out instinctively, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. Their eyes met once more, and in that look was an unspoken truth. Something had changed irrevocably for both of them. Lily, who had been clutching her teddy bear tightly in the audience, bounced to her feet. "That was my daddy," she shouted proudly, her young voice carrying through the hall. The crowd laughed, warmly touched by her joy. Caleb flushed, but Maria's heart melted. For a moment, she saw not just a soldier or a handyman, but a father whose love burned brighter than any spotlight. As the ovation continued, Clara rose from her chair, her smile fixed, but her eyes venomous. She raised her glass high, masking her fury with performance. To Maria and her unexpected talent, she said, her voice dripping sarcasm, but the guests cheered, sincerely drowning her malice in waves of admiration. Maria bowed her head overwhelmed. Caleb squeezed her arm, gently grounding her in the chaos. He bent close, his words meant only for her. "You were magnificent." Her throat tightened. "I couldn't have done it without you." The applause lasted long minutes, echoing even after the crowd began to settle. Yet in Clara's chest a storm was brewing. She had lost control of the narrative, and she would not forgive it. For Maria and Caleb, though, this night was not one of humiliation but of revelation. The duet had become more than music. It was defiance, healing, and the beginning of something neither could yet name, but both felt in the marrow of their bones. And as Maria stepped off the stage, her hand brushing against Caleb's, the chandelier light caught on her tears, not of shame, but of release. The trap had failed. The healing had begun. The ballroom had not yet quieted from the thunder of applause when Maria swayed again. The smile that had bloomed on her lips faltered, replaced by a grimace. Her hand pressed firmly to her belly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Maria Caleb murmured, stepping closer. Before she could answer, her knees buckled. The microphone clattered to the stage floor with a piercing squeal of feedback. Gasps erupted across the hall. Maria collapsed, her body trembling under the weight of sudden pain. Caleb dropped his guitar without hesitation and caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy, I've got you," he whispered. His arms steady, his soldier's instincts overtaking everything else. The crowd stirred into chaos. Guests rose from their seats, murmuring frantically. Some reached for their phones, others looked on with wide-eyed panic. From her place at the head table, Clara stood, her face tightening into something cold and unyielding. "She'll be fine," she declared, loudly raising her voice above the confusion. "Get her off the stage. The wedding must go on." Jonathan turned sharply. "Clara, she's in pain. She needs help." Clara's expression hardened. "It's a fainting spell. Nothing more. Don't ruin our day for a servant's dramatics." The cruelty in her words struck Caleb like a slap. He held Maria tighter, feeling her tremors, the sweat beading on her brow. He knew this was no fainting spell, it was serious. "Someone call an ambulance," he barked. His voice was steady, commanding the voice of a man who had once led others through danger. The crowd froze, then scrambled into action. Clara's lips curled. "No one moves," she hissed, stepping forward. "This is my wedding." She stays put. The guests recoiled at her venom. Jonathan's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, another voice rose from the back of the room. Victor Hale, the head chef, stepped forward, a small recorder clutched in his hand. His face was pale, but resolute. "I think Victor said," his voice carrying across the silent hall, "the guests deserve to know the truth." He pressed play. The ballroom filled with Clara's voice, icy, merciless, recorded in secret days earlier. "We'll have the maid sing. I don't care if she cracks under the strain. Don't let her leave the stage until she's finished. If she breaks all the better." Gasps broke out. The guests turned in shock, their gazes whipping from Victor to Clara. Jonathan staggered back as if the words had physically struck him. You said that," he stammered. Clara's face blanched, then flushed crimson. "Lies, fabrications," she cried, but the unmistakable cadence of her own voice echoed still. Victor lifted the recorder higher. "I was there. I heard her. And I will swear to it under oath." The hall erupted in whispers, sharp and angry. The admiration Clara had craved had twisted into disgust before her eyes. Jonathan's face hardened. He reached up his hands, trembling, and tore the wedding ring from his finger. He held it aloft, then let it drop onto the table with a metallic clang. "This wedding," he said, his voice clear, "is over." The words cut through the room like thunder. Clara staggered, disbelief etched across her face. "Jonathan, you can't, I won't marry cruelty," he interrupted, his tone cold, final. "Not after this." The guests stood frozen, absorbing the spectacle. Some clapped quietly, others shook their heads. Clara, humiliated, spun on her heels and stormed from the ballroom, her train dragging behind her like a vanquished banner. Caleb adjusted his hold on Maria, who groaned softly, her face pale. "Stay with me," he urged. Her eyes fluttered, finding his face, then slipping closed again. "Make way," he ordered the crowd. Without hesitation, the sea of gowns and tuxedos parted. The veteran carried the pregnant maid down the aisle, not of matrimony, but of revelation, each step steady and strong. The applause began again, not raucous, not mocking, but reverent. guests clapped softly, respectfully, as though honoring something greater than the spectacle they had come to witness. Lily ran ahead, clutching her teddy bear, her small voice calling Daddy, hurry. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her steps were fearless. As Caleb reached the grand doors, Jonathan followed behind his face, grave but resolute. He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Go," he said. "I'll handle the fallout here. Take care of her." Caleb gave a single nod. He pushed through the heavy doors, the night air rushing in cool and sharp. Outside, sirens wailed faintly. In the distance, help was on its way. Under the glow of the mansion's floodlights, Caleb laid Maria gently into the back of a waiting car. Lily, climbing in beside her, clutching her hand. Maria's eyes flickered open for a moment. She whispered something faint, almost lost in the wind. "What is it?" Caleb bent close. Her lips curved weakly. "Thank you for not hiding." Then she drifted into unconsciousness. Caleb closed the door firmly, his jaw set. "Hold on, Maria," he whispered. "You're not alone anymore." The car sped off toward the hospital, the lights of the mansion receding behind them. Inside, the echoes of truth and betrayal still shook the guests who had gathered to celebrate a union. Instead, they had witnessed something far greater, the collapse of cruelty and the rise of courage. And in Caleb's heart, for the first time in years, he felt the clarity of purpose. He was no longer just surviving. He was fighting for Maria, for her child, for the music that had bound them in defiance. The wedding had ended in scandal, but a story far more powerful had just begun. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and rain. Outside the window, a storm lashed against the glass sheets of water cascading down as thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, the steady beeping of machines measured life and safety, their rhythm grounding amidst the chaos of the past night. Maria lay on the bed, pale but breathing evenly. An IV line ran from her arm, delivering strength. Her body had been too drained to hold on its own. Her hands rested gently over her swollen belly, and for the first time in days, her face showed peace rather than fear. Caleb sat in the corner chair, his broad frame slumped with exhaustion, but his eyes alert, watchful. His guitar leaned against the wall beside him, as though it too stood guard. Lily sat cross-legged at the foot of the bed, her teddy bear propped beside Maria's arm, like a silent companion. When Maria stirred, her eyelids fluttering open, the first thing she saw was Lily's face. The little girl smiled, leaning forward eagerly. "You're awake," she whispered. Maria blinked, disoriented. "Where?" "You're safe," Caleb said, rising from his chair. His voice was low, steady. "The doctor said, both you and the baby are all right. They'll keep you here for a few days to make sure." Tears welled in Maria's eyes, though she tried to blink them away. "I thought I'd lost." Her voice broke. She touched her belly again, relief flooding her expression, when she felt the reassuring kick of life within. "You didn't lose anything," Caleb assured her. "Not tonight. Not while I was there." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the storm outside. Maria looked at him, then really looked, her eyes lingering on the lines of weariness etched into his face, the quiet strength in his stance. He was more than just the man who had stepped on stage. He was someone who carried battles far older, deeper. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. Caleb paused, as though the answer was heavier than words. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch cruelty win. And because—" his gaze softened. "Because your voice deserved to be heard." Maria swallowed hard, her lips trembling. No one had ever said that to her before, not as truth. Lily, sensing the weight of the moment, tugged gently on Maria's hand. She pulled from her pocket a small square of fabric, a hand-stitched handkerchief she had been saving. Its edges were uneven, the embroidery crooked, but her effort was clear. "For you," Lily said shyly. "So you don't forget. You sing like angels." The words pierced Maria's heart. She pressed the cloth to her lips, sobbing quietly, as she took Lily's small hands into her own. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll never forget." Hours later, as the storm eased, a soft knock came at the door. Margaret Hensley entered her presence dignified, yet warm. She carried no entourage, no jewels, just a small bouquet of daisies cradled in her hands. Maria tried to sit up, startled, but Caleb gently pressed her shoulder back against the pillow. "Rest," he murmured. Margaret stepped closer, her eyes kind. "My dear, I came as soon as I heard. I want to apologize for what Clara did, for the cruelty she inflicted. It should never have happened under my family's roof." Maria's eyes widened. "You don't owe me an apology, ma'am. You've always been kind." "But kindness is not enough if it remains silent," Margaret said firmly. "I should have spoken sooner. I should have shielded you." She placed the daisies on the bedside table. "From now on, you will not walk this road alone. I will see to that personally." Maria's lips quivered, unable to form words. Caleb inclined his head in quiet respect. Margaret turned to him. "You are Caleb Cross?" "Yes." "The man with the guitar?" "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I saw what you did. You not only saved her voice, you saved her dignity. I won't forget that. And neither will many of the guests who witnessed it." Caleb shifted, uncomfortable with praise. "I just did what had to be done." Which Margaret replied gently, "is the mark of a true man." That night, after Margaret left the room, grew still again. Maria drifted in and out of sleep, her body recovering. Caleb sat by the window, strumming softly on his guitar so quietly it was almost like a lullaby. Lily curled against him, half asleep, humming along without knowing the words. Maria watched them through heavy lids. She saw how Caleb's large hand rested protectively on his daughter's back, how the music seemed to flow from him, not as performance, but as prayer. And for the first time in years, Maria felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. She closed her eyes, whispering a promise to her unborn child. "You will grow up in a world where kindness still lives." Tonight proved it. Outside, the storm broke at last, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of moonlight. It poured through the window, bathing the three of them, maid, soldier, child, in silver glow. It wasn't yet dawn, but it was sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, a new story was quietly beginning. Morning broke softly over the hospital, the storm clouds finally giving way to pale sunlight. The rain had washed the city clean, and the air carried that fragile freshness that comes only after a night of chaos. Maria stirred in her bed, blinking against the light streaming through the blinds. The steady rhythm of machines had become a comfort, a reminder that she and her child were still safe. Across the room, Caleb sat on the windowsill, his guitar on his lap. He was strumming quietly, almost absent-mindedly, as though coaxing the world back into balance. Lily leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, her teddy bear dangling from one hand. It looked for all the world like a small family tableau, one Maria longed for, but dared not name. "Good morning," Caleb said softly, when he noticed Maria watching. Maria smiled faintly. "You play even when you don't know it." He chuckled. Old habits. Hard to shake. She wanted to ask about those habits, about the man he had been, before he became the quiet handyman who had appeared like a guardian in her darkest hour. But before she could, the door swung open. Victor Hale entered carrying a folded newspaper. His face was weary, but his eyes were alight with something fierce. "Have you seen it?" he asked, holding up the front page. Maria frowned. Seen what Victor spread the paper across the bed. There, in grainy but unmistakable color, was an image from the wedding. Maria, her head lifted in song, and Caleb beside her with his guitar. The headline blared, "From Maid to Miracle." A voice that stunned the Hensley wedding. Maria gasped, covering her mouth. "It's everywhere," Victor continued. "Some guest recorded the whole thing on their phone. The video's already viral, millions of views overnight. People aren't mocking you, Maria. They're calling you a symbol of hope." Her chest tightened. "Hope," Caleb leaned over the paper. "They're right," he said quietly. Victor nodded. "Record labels are sniffing around. Journalists want interviews. But more importantly, the truth about Clara is out. The recording I played, people believe it. Jonathan has publicly announced the wedding is canceled. Clara's reputation is in tatters." Maria struggled to take it all in. "I never wanted fame. I just wanted to survive." "You did more than survive," Caleb said gently. "You showed them what dignity looks like. And now people are listening." Over the next days, the hospital became a revolving door of well-wishers and reporters. Bouquets piled on the windowsill, letters stacked on the bedside table. Strangers sent cards calling Maria an angel, a warrior, a voice for the invisible. Maria accepted it all with humility, but inside she wrestled with disbelief. Could it be true? Could a voice once silenced now carry meaning for others? Caleb watched quietly. He did not seek the cameras or the attention. When asked about his part, he shrugged, deflecting praise. Yet the internet buzzed with talk of the mysterious guitarist, the soldier with the worn guitar who had turned humiliation into harmony. Lily, however, was thrilled. "Daddy, you're famous," she exclaimed one evening, dancing around the hospital room. "Everyone's talking about you and Miss Maria." Caleb smiled, but shook his head. "Fame's not the goal, Lily." "Then what is?" Maria asked, softly curious. He hesitated, searching for the words. "Peace, for her child, for mine, for anyone who's been stepped on." Maria studied him, realizing how deeply his battles ran. This wasn't about recognition for him. It was about redemption for himself, for his daughter, for the world he'd fought to protect, but never felt at home in afterward. A week later, Maria was discharged. Margaret Hensley insisted on covering all expenses, her quiet rebellion against Clara's cruelty. "It's the least I can do," she said, pressing Maria's hands. "And you must promise me you'll never hide that gift again." Maria nodded, though her heart quaked. When they stepped outside, cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed, calling her name. Maria froze, clutching her belly. Caleb immediately stepped forward, shielding her with his broad frame, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Back up," he commanded, his voice calm but firm. Something in his tone, something undeniably soldierly, made even the most persistent reporter hesitate. He guided Maria and Lily through the crowd, never once letting his protective stance falter. Later, in the quiet of Caleb's apartment, Maria sat at the small kitchen table, while Lily chattered about making cookies. Maria traced her fingers over the grain of the wood, overwhelmed. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed. "The attention, the expectations. What if I fail?" Caleb set his guitar down and met her gaze. "Then you fail honestly. But you don't run. Because your voice isn't just yours anymore. It belongs to everyone who heard it and found courage in it." His words sank deep. Maria realized he wasn't just speaking to her, he was speaking to himself as well. Lily bounced into the room, flour smudged on her nose. "Daddy, play while we bake." Caleb groaned good-naturedly, but he picked up his guitar. As he strummed, Maria found herself humming along, then singing softly. The melody wasn't rehearsed, wasn't planned. It was simply life ordinary, imperfect, but alive. And in that small apartment above the laundromat, surrounded by laughter and song, Maria felt the ashes of her old life begin to shift. From them, something new was rising. Not just survival, not just defiance, but hope reborn. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. Maria's duet with Caleb had become more than a viral video. It had transformed into a cultural touchstone. Talk shows praised her courage. Radio stations replayed the clip of her trembling voice that grew into strength. And though Maria had never sought the spotlight, she suddenly found herself its reluctant center. She tried to stay grounded. Mornings were spent at doctor's visits, afternoons helping around Caleb's small apartment, evenings humming lullabies to her unborn child, with Lily curled up beside her. For the first time in years, Maria felt something like family. But shadows have a way of returning when light grows brightest. One evening, as Maria and Caleb prepared a simple dinner, a knock rattled the door. Caleb stiffened instinctively, setting down the pan. He opened the door to find a man leaning casually against the frame, a man with slicked back hair, an expensive leather jacket, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, well," the man drawled. "If it isn't Maria Torres. Looking radiant, I must say. Pregnancy suits you." Maria froze, her hand flying to her belly. "Antonio." Caleb glanced between them, his jaw tightening. "You know him. He's—" Maria's voice faltered. "He's the father." Antonio stepped inside without waiting for permission, his eyes sweeping the modest apartment with disdain. "So this is where you've been hiding, singing your little songs, turning the world against me." "No one even knew your name," Maria whispered. "You left." "I left because you were weak," Antonio snapped. "But now you're a star. A miracle maid, they're calling you. And miracles," he said, smiling coldly, "are worth money." Caleb stepped forward, his presence filling the room. "You need to leave." Antonio raised a brow. "And who are you?" The hired help. Caleb's fists curled, but his voice remained steady. "I'm the man making sure she and her child are safe." The tension crackled. For a moment, Antonio seemed ready to push further, but he caught the unwavering steel in Caleb's gaze. With a smirk, he backed toward the door. "This isn't over, Maria. Fame changes things, and I intend to claim what's mine." When the door shut, Maria sagged into the chair, trembling. Caleb crouched before her, taking her hands. "He doesn't get to decide your future. Not anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. "But what if he tries? He'll use the baby. He'll use the story. I can't go through that again." Caleb squeezed her hands. "Then we'll face him. Together." As if Antonio's reappearance weren't enough, another storm brewed. Clara Hensley, humiliated and discarded, resurfaced with venom. She could no longer command society's admiration, but she wielded influence like a poisoned blade. Tabloids began printing stories that painted Maria as manipulative, claiming she had staged her collapse at the wedding to steal sympathy. Anonymous sources whispered about her past, twisting truths into scandals. Social media accounts popped up, smearing Caleb as a washed-up soldier chasing fame through pity. Maria felt the weight of it crushing her. One afternoon, she sat on Caleb's sofa, scrolling through headlines, until tears blurred the screen. "They're destroying everything," she whispered. "All the good, it's slipping away." Caleb gently took the phone from her hand. "Listen to me. They can say what they want, but the truth doesn't change. You stood up when the world tried to silence you. That's real. That's what people remember." "But what if I'm not strong enough?" she asked, her voice cracking. Caleb's eyes softened. He reached for his guitar, strumming the opening chords of the lullaby they had once shared in the mansion kitchen. "Strength isn't about never breaking," he said. It's about finding your song again when you do. Maria's tears spilled freely. She joined him, her voice shaky at first, then steadier as the music carried her. The notes filled the small apartment, weaving a cocoon against the lies outside. Lily peeked in from her room, smiling sleepily. See, heroes don't hide. Maria laughed through her tears, brushing them away. Caleb met her gaze, and in that look was something unspoken, fragile but undeniable. That night, when the world had quieted, Caleb sat by the window, his guitar resting on his lap. Memories he usually kept buried rose to the surface. The war, the loss of his wife, the silence that had followed. He had told himself he'd never step on a stage again, never risk the pain of losing music a second time. But Maria had changed that. She had pulled the notes out of him as though they'd been waiting for her all along. Maybe Lily's right, he murmured to himself. Maybe heroes really don't hide. Behind him, Maria stirred in her sleep, one hand over her belly, her breathing calm. Caleb looked at her and knew whatever storms came, they would face them not as broken souls, but as survivors rising from the ashes. And though the world outside sharpened its knives, the music inside that small apartment grew louder, carrying them into the battles yet to come. The auditorium was unlike anything Maria had ever seen. Rows upon rows of velvet seats stretched into the distance, chandeliers hung like stars above, and banners fluttered across the stage with the words, "Charity Gala for Families of Veterans." It was an evening meant to honor those who had served and to raise hope for those still struggling. Backstage, Maria wrung her hands together, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the hum of hundreds of voices in the audience, a sea of strangers waiting for her. "I can't do this," she whispered, turning to Caleb. "I'm not ready. They'll expect perfection, and I'm just me." Caleb placed his calloused hands gently on her shoulders. His gaze was steady, his voice low. "Maria, they're not here for perfection. They're here for truth. And you have that more than anyone I know." Maria blinked back tears. "But what if I fail? Then we fail together," he said simply. He lifted his guitar. "But I don't think you will. Not tonight." Lily peeked around the curtain, her eyes wide with wonder at the glittering audience. She bounced back to them, grinning. "Daddy, Miss Maria, it's so big out there. They're going to love you. I know it." Her faith was infectious. Maria smiled faintly, inhaling deeply. She looked at Caleb. "All right, let's do this." The announcer's voice rang out across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Maria Torres and Caleb Cross." The applause began polite, but as Maria and Caleb stepped into the spotlight, something shifted. The audience recognized them not just as performers, but as the pair whose story had spread across the nation. Phones lifted discreetly. Whispers ran like electricity through the crowd. Caleb settled onto a stool at center stage, his guitar resting against his knee. Maria stood beside him, clutching the microphone with trembling hands. She closed her eyes as the first chord filled the room, warm, grounding, familiar. Then she began to sing. The song was new, one they had written together in late nights at Caleb's kitchen table. Its title, "Home in the Light." The lyrics spoke of loss, of wounds that scarred deep of nights when the world felt too heavy. But it also spoke of rising, of finding family in unexpected places, of the strength born from kindness. Maria's voice trembled at first, but when Caleb's chords joined steady as a heartbeat, she found her footing. Verse by verse, her voice grew stronger, soaring higher. By the chorus, the auditorium was silent, every listener caught in the spell. Caleb added his own voice, then deep and rough-edged blending with hers. Their duet wasn't polished like professionals, but it was real. Pain and hope wove together in a harmony that resonated with everyone who had ever lost, ever loved, ever dared to rise again. In the front rows, veterans wiped their eyes. Older couples held hands tightly. Parents hugged their children closer. And when Maria's voice broke slightly on the word home, it didn't sound like weakness. It sounded like truth. As the final chorus swelled, the audience began to rise one by one until the entire auditorium stood. Applause thundered even before the last note faded, echoing like waves crashing against the shore. Maria lowered the microphone, her chest heaving, her cheeks damp with tears. Caleb strummed the last lingering chord, then lifted his gaze to hers. In that moment, under the bright lights and the roar of applause, something passed between them, an unspoken vow. They had both been broken, but together, they were whole. After the performance, they returned backstage, dazed by the overwhelming response. Lily barreled into them, hugging Maria's waist and Caleb's leg at once. "You were amazing," she squealed. Everyone cried. Even me. Maria laughed through her tears, pulling the little girl close. Caleb ruffled his daughter's hair, his own smile soft, humbled. As they stood there, Victor Hale appeared, his expression warm with pride. "You changed something tonight," he said. "Not just for the audience, for yourselves. Remember that." Margaret Hensley arrived as well, her eyes moist. She embraced Maria gently, then turned to Caleb. "What I saw tonight was not performance. It was testimony. Don't ever hide it again." Caleb nodded, emotion thick in his throat. Later, after the gala had ended, and the city lights twinkled outside, Maria, Caleb, and Lily walked out into the cool night. Maria inhaled deeply, the air crisp against her skin. She felt lighter, freer, as though the chains of Clara's cruelty and Antonio's shadow had been loosened by the power of song. Caleb looked down at her, his hand brushing against hers. For the first time, neither of them pulled away. "See," he murmured, "I told you you didn't need perfection. You just needed to be you." Maria's eyes glistened. "And you." They walked on their steps, slow, unhurried. Lily skipped ahead, singing a piece of the chorus in her sweet, imperfect voice. "From the ashes, we rise with love as our guide." And for once, Maria believed it fully. The sun broke gently over the city, casting its first golden rays through the narrow streets and rooftops. It was the kind of morning that felt like a gift, fresh, unspoiled, promising renewal. Caleb, Maria, and Lily stepped outside together, the air crisp with possibility. The gala performance was already behind them, but its echoes still lingered. Everywhere they went, people recognized them, not as a maid and a handyman, but as the voices that had turned humiliation into healing. Yet on this morning, away from flashing cameras and whispered praise, they were just themselves, a father, a mother-to-be, and a little girl clutching her teddy bear with sleepy determination. Maria paused on the sidewalk, tilting her face toward the warmth of the sun. Her hand rested lightly on her belly, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of fear. She felt hope, steady, real, like the rhythm of Caleb's guitar. "Daddy, look." Lily tugged Caleb's hand, pointing to a small radio shop across the street. The old speakers propped in the window were playing a song. Familiar chords drifted into the morning air. Maria gasped softly. It was Home in the Light, the song she and Caleb had sung at the gala, the song born at a kitchen table with scribbled notes and quiet prayers. Now it was out in the world, traveling through unseen airwaves, carrying their voices into homes and cars and hearts. Passers-by paused to listen, some humming along, others simply smiling. An older couple even clasped hands, tighter eyes misty with memory. Caleb glanced at Maria, his expression caught between disbelief and awe. "You hear that?" he murmured. Maria nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "We're out there." Lily clapped her hands. "We're famous." Caleb chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Not famous, kiddo. Just heard." He looked back at Maria, his voice gentler. "And sometimes, being heard is enough." They walked to the park, nearby the kind of place where families gathered on weekends. Children played tag on the grass. Joggers passed by with headphones in, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted from a vendor's cart. Caleb carried his guitar slung across his back, more out of habit than intention. They found a bench under a blooming oak tree. Maria lowered herself carefully, her hand still on her belly. Caleb sat beside her. Lily climbing between them, swinging her legs as she sang snippets of their song. Maria leaned back, watching the morning unfold. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "that maybe all of this happened for a reason? The humiliation, the song, the stage. It led us here." Caleb studied her for a moment, the sunlight painting gold across her face. "I used to think life was just a mess of accidents," he admitted. "But maybe you're right. Maybe even ashes can point the way to something new." Their hands brushed on the bench. This time, neither pulled away. In the distance, a group of people recognized them and began to approach. Maria tensed, but instead of questions or cameras, they came simply to thank her. An older veteran with a cane removed his cap, his voice shaking. "Ma'am, sir, that song last night, it reminded me why I kept going. Reminded me of my wife. God rest her. Thank you." Maria pressed her hand to her chest, humbled. Caleb stood and shook the man's hand firmly, his own eyes misting. After they left, Maria whispered, "See, it wasn't just music. It mattered." Caleb nodded. "It always did. I just forgot." As the day warmed, they rose and walked again. Maria with her steady steps, Caleb carrying Lily briefly when her legs grew tired. To anyone passing, they looked like any other family. But to themselves, they felt like something new, not bound by the roles others had forced on them, but free, chosen whole. The radio in a nearby cafe played their song again. Maria laughed softly, shaking her head in disbelief. Caleb plucked a few chords on his guitar, matching the tune, and Lily twirled on the sidewalk, her laughter ringing brighter than the morning bells. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath for them. Maria turned to Caleb, her voice quiet, but sure. "Whatever comes next, I'm not afraid anymore." He met her gaze, steady and unyielding. "That's because you're not alone anymore." The three of them stood together as the city bustled on, unaware of the ordinary miracle unfolding on a quiet corner. A soldier who had once buried his music, a maid who had once been silenced, and a child who believed heroes don't hide, now bound together in a dawn of their own making. The sun climbed higher, flooding the streets with light. And as their song played once more on the radio, the words carried beyond them to anyone listening, to anyone in need of hope. "From the ashes, we rise with love as our guide." And so they did. Dear friends, before you go, we'd love to know where you're watching from today. It always brings us joy to see the many places our stories travel to, and how they connect us across distances. If this story touched your heart, we warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next journey of hope, healing, and love. Every new story is crafted to lift your spirit and remind us all of the power of kindness. And finally, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending your precious time with us today. Your presence, your comments, and your support mean the world. Until we meet again in the next story, may peace and love always guide your path.